Well, hey everyone, and welcome to episode number 102 of the Other Six podcast. My name is Chad Boken. I am your host. Joining me once again in the studio, my co-host, our student pastor, the man who told a chemistry joke but got no reaction. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Matt Aldridge. Matt, how are you today, sir?
And I'm fantastic. I wanted a Breaking Bad reference or something. Like when someone says chemistry, it's just straight what I go
What's
to.
my name?
Boy,
That's honestly this is not something I prepared to say or thought that Breaking Bad was going to go there. You would make a fantastic Walter White for Halloween. Like an absolutely
he's not talking to me.
That's right. I don't know what you and Rose were
White.
struggling about this week, but I fixed it. Like, you're
go.
welcome.
That was
go.
it. Speaking of which, also joining us in the studio today, our lead pastor, Mr. Jim Botts. Jim, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing great. It's a great week. Beautiful weather. It's wonderful.
Oh, yeah. The fall is it's here, right?
This is why we live in the South right about now.
Yeah, because it feels nice, a little breeze. You know, I could deal with a little bit more, but
The days are still a little hotter than I want it to be, but the nights are really good.
Yeah.
The nights are good.
You can ride a motorcycle without feeling like you're riding into an oven to check a pizza. So it's not too bad. Not too bad.
Well, good deal. Well, gentlemen, how was your weekend? Jim, we'll start with you. What'd you
Mine
guys
was
get up
good.
to?
So we did, let's see, we went, the movie Big Fish, right? So we went to
they
Goat
filmed
Island.
that. Yeah.
So we
filmed
went
here,
there, So we were told, hey, bring a bag of carrots. These goats will come out. Okay, so a bag of carrots contains 20 carrots.
Sure.
You know how many goats there are?
More than 20.
Friggin' 100. And as soon as we opened the bag, I'll do it.
Too many goats.
So they were up on us, and we're like throwing carrots at them. It was fun, but when the carrots ran out and a third of the goats were there and the other 2/3 were still coming, Rose and I were like, we gotta get out of here. It was fun though. It was really cool.
No, I remember back when they when that movie was filmed here, because they did casting all over the place.
Did they? Wow.
Yeah, so literally I was in college, but my high school band there's a scene where there's like a marching band in the center of town. That's my high school band. That was
such a weird movie.
It is a weird movie.
I tried. My brother was in like a local theater troupe thing of it, and so I went and watched. I was like, "What is happening?"
Right.
And he told me like, "Oh, it's a movie," and it's like some of it's based in Alabama. And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I went and watched it. And was even more confused.
Right.
Like it was.
Ashton.
What is going on?
They filmed
idea.
all the college scenes were filmed at Huntington here in town.
Yes.
I mean, so literally they filmed it, just all over the place here. And but yeah, I remember back when they were, because everybody wanted to go get casting for it and be an extra in the movie and all that kind of stuff.
So what we did was kind of fun. So we went to the island that day,
right?
And then that night we watched the movie.
Yeah.
So we recognized all the
that's pretty
locations.
cool.
That's pretty cool.
That was really cool. Yeah, we're like.
Now, what was the thing that got the biggest laugh when I finally saw it in the theater was they're just sitting there and a commercial comes on. It's like Larry Puckett Chevrolet. We let our customers do the talking, and everyone here has heard that commercial for growing up for years, and so everybody thought that was the funniest thing ever.
Oh, that's cool.
If you're not from here, you wouldn't really get it. But
if you don't know, you don't know.
Yeah, that's right. But it was a good time. So you went to big
fed
fish
the goats and then got out of there. Actually, we rode the motorcycle around, had a really nice ride everywhere, and then ended up there. So it was fun.
Nice. Matt, what'd you get up to, buddy?
Avoiding depression at all costs. I hate being able to relate to you Auburn fans so much. Like it's just this.
Vandy sends its regards.
It's so awful.
Yeah,
but you know what? Every dog has its day per se.
Yeah.
So.
Hey, listen, it was like a top 10 football apocalypse this past week, wasn't it?
Yeah, meltdown.
It's just the more that I watched it, it was like, all right, we'll wake up. Yeah. It's like, all right, we'll wake up. All right, now we'll just panic throw it to Ryan Williams for the rest of the second half.
Man, I tell you what.
Okay, we're going to lose.
Vandy showed up.
Like.
I did not believe it until they were literally in victory formation that Vandy was going to win that game. And even then, I was like,
our defense was just so bad. Like, it was just awful. Like, all they did was just run it right at us, and we have guys playing like 18 yards off the football. Didn't make a whole lot of sense, but only up from here. So,
meanwhile,
it is what it is.
Meanwhile, Auburn's like, we didn't get beat as bad as we expected to be.
We thought this would be worse.
Yeah, so for an Auburn fan, Saturday wasn't too bad of a
only
day.
Got one black eye. It wasn't a bad fight.
Now, the funny thing is, so they tore down the goalpost at Vandy, and then they went and threw them in the Cumberland River.
Yeah, that's
right.
It's 3 miles away. They had to march for like 3
marched
miles
all through Broadway.
Like
you see what they've done with it since?
What's that?
So they fished it out of the lake, and they're going to chop it up and sell it, auction it off to pay for the SEC for the $350,000 fine that they got for taking it off the field.
Listen, everybody needs to let Vanderbilt. This is as good as it gets. Like, sorry,
absolutely.
apologies to any Vandy fans out in the audience, but like, it will not get any better.
Obviously,
like,
they're all smart enough to know.
That's right.
They know.
There's nowhere to go but down.
Yeah, that's
football
right.
wise.
You know, enjoy it. You did it. We're proud of you. But this is about as good as it gets.
Hats off to them. They had a fantastic game plan.
Yep.
And like, I mean, you got to take your lumps where you get them. So
School full of engineers. They've engineered a victory.
They figured it out. They did. They got us.
Very good. Yeah, we hung out. We got the fall decorations out. Speaking of fall,
we meaning Christy did all the work and you watch football.
That's exactly right. Yeah, no, I helped her get them down from the attic. Thank you very much. And yeah, so she it kind of looks like Hobby Lobby is in our house right now, but
no
you know what?
shame.
I'm here for it.
I love Hobby Lobby.
Yeah,
no shame whatsoever.
Have you been lately?
Maybe a month
so
or so
it's
ago.
like Christmas.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah,
everywhere.
I'm fine with that.
So
Whatsoever.
like, it's funny because it's officially fall, but Hobby Lobby, because they most of their customers are craftsmen, people that do crafts. They have to be like 6 months ahead on the season.
Yeah.
So like their fall stuff was out on St. Patrick's Day, and now it's all Christmas.
It's been Christmas for 3 weeks.
Yeah, it has been. That's right.
I mean, it's just.
So anyway,
I love Hobby Lobby though.
but no, we decorated for fall, and it's here, and it's kind of nice to get to enjoy that. So it's good to see the seasons changing. Lots of good things happening.
Pumpkin spice latte season.
That's
Won't
right.
be long. It'll be peppermint mocha season.
That's right, and I'm here for that. So I have to admit, I'm more of a Christmas guy than a fall guy.
I'm more of a Bailey's Irish cream guy. Really.
I like, again, I don't really do coffee, but I like the smells. The smells are cool.
Coffee smells are great.
Yeah, coffee smells are good. All the pumpkin spice things, all
ginger
the
bread, all that kind
evergreen,
of stuff.
like all those smells are great. I like my house to smell nice and less like my dog. So
That's a good
all of those
There you
things
go.
just match
That'll do
that,
it.
and it's a good time.
Well, a good weekend. I do want to also talk about, speaking of holidays,
Okay.
any
What did we
holidays that we
miss?
might have missed over this past week. And so October 4th, speaking of your dog, World Animal Day.
Oh.
So, shout out to all the animals.
How does one celebrate that? Because I feel like
Barbecue.
you can make. I was about to
You
say
can
you could make a lot of people real happy or a lot of people real
Or
upset.
delicious animal day.
Yeah, what would you do for Winston,
Hot
your dog?
dogs.
Hot dogs?
I don't know, but just it feels right.
So World Animal Day, I hope people celebrate accordingly. October 5th, World Teachers Day.
Oh, hey, my wife's a teacher.
I was about to say,
Shout out to Jessie.
you're 2 for 2 right now. my friend.
I'm killing it.
So
Like, this is great.
how did you celebrate World Teachers Day?
What day was
Jesse?
October? What day was that?
A couple days ago.
October 5th, that would have been Saturday, I think, right?
What did we do? Well, so she had all her friends come over to our house because this past weekend, Saturday night, was Pike Road's homecoming.
That's
so a lot
right,
of her teacher
Homecoming.
friends had sons and daughters and stuff who were in homecoming. So some of them, they're like, well, we don't really want to go home while they're at home. So Jesse's like, well, y'all can all just come to our house. So
there you go.
Literally, I'm just saying, I had a house full of teachers
on
and
World
they
Teacher
did
Day.
like a painting pumpkin craft thing, and so. I
did it,
I
buddy.
did it. I didn't even know that I
That's
did
a
it,
little
but I
over the
did
top,
it.
really.
Sorry.
I didn't do anything for World Teachers
There's
Day.
a lot of teachers.
And then October 6th, this past Sunday, National Coaches Day.
Oh,
So shout out to all of our coaches out there to do such a good job with all different kinds of sports or just coaching people in life.
It really is a cool thing. Like through FCA and through my dad was a coach growing up. I've done coaching. Like you really do have like a crazy window to impact the next generation in a way that like even me as a student pastor will never have.
That's
like
right.
just the access you have. And yes, it can be like we want Christian coaches and things like that. But even just bigger than that, of like the family situations that they deal with and have kids going through every single day, like the positive impact you can have as a male or female influence in their life is crazy. So
and there's all kinds too. A friend of mine's a life coach, and so he's a regional life coach for the I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's the Medical and Dental Association of the whole West Coast. So he coaches doctors and dentists. Oh yeah, and he's been a pastor for almost 60 years now. So he's an older guy, and he's like, I speak directly into the lives of these high powered doctors and dentists and stuff. I'm like, wow. So it's a great ministry too. Life coaching is pretty powerful,
and they need that. They need that. It's a big deal. I mean, an interesting stat. Like I think I've read somewhere that dentists have like the highest suicide rate of like any other profession.
Wow.
It's kind of nuts.
That
and vets, yeah. Like veterinarians.
Yes, veterinarians.
Yeah,
veterinarians.
veterinarians.
Dentists.
Kind of weird, huh?
It's like you can't laugh and gas.
People's
Like,
breath
relax.
is terrible.
It's like,
It's just, you
all
can't,
day,
they cannot.
every day.
But they
It's awful.
need. I didn't bring the conversation down. They need coaches, so we're grateful for our coaches on National Coaches Day. But no, good weekend. A good weekend here at Vaughn Forest Church.
Yep.
Continued in our conversation of our message series. Oops, did I marry the wrong person?
We might have.
might have. And we talked about Mr. Right. So we talked
did.
about the husband's role in marriage this past week. But before we get into kind of our deeper conversation, I want to kick things off today and hear from you guys about how you met your spouse and what that kind of journey that you guys took to being married. So how did your wives know that they had met Mr. Right? So Jim, we'll start with you, buddy.
Wow. So we met, we've told this before, but we met on a drug deal. I was selling and her friend was buying and she was waiting outside. So that's where we met. And then we started sort of just relating from there. So it's kind of weird. Like, how does she know that she met Mr. Right? She made the first move, to be honest with you. So
listen,
I figured it was like,
I was about to say, that surprises me not one iota, not one.
So I was kind of like, okay, so that's kind of how that happened. So anyway, so we were both not Christ followers. So, we met, we started dating, and then she went through kind of a crisis with her dad was kind of a different animal.
Yeah.
And so she ended up not having a place to stay, to live. So I was living with my mom at the time, so we took her in. So it was like me, my mom, and Rose, and so we did that for a little while. And then we were just like, hey, I was playing drums. Cops are coming to the house all the time, the apartment. And it was like, why don't we just buy a house? We don't have cops coming all the time.
Because you were playing the drums, the cops were coming? Because it was loud.
Not the drugs from earlier. That we had earlier aforementioned.
Nobody got wise on that. So anyways, we just decided, hey, let's just buy a house. And you could play drums there. I'm like, okay. And well, since we're buying a house, should probably just get married too, huh?
Why not?
Yeah. So it's kind of
she utilized his love of drumming to leverage the marriage relationship.
What's super romantic?
Yeah, I was gonna say
all about it.
I like it. All right.
Anyway.
So that's kind of all right, Matt. How about you, buddy?
Jesse and I I was fresh out of high school, and Jesse was a year out of college, or a year like into college.
Okay.
And a year into college. So we're only like 6 months apart, but we were like a year difference in school. And I had just gone through a lot of really hard things in my personal life, like my parents splitting up, and that was just ugly and awful and just gross. It was just no fun at all. Yeah. And in that, like, I just gotten really stinking mad at God just for, like, God, how could you let this happen to good people and all these things? And my dad was a pastor, and like, I just don't get how we served, and yet all this, I couldn't reckon that. Like, I could not make sense of that. Right. And so I ran from God like my entire senior year of high school. And then I got to the point where like everything, it's like May, and I'm like, what the heck am I going to do next? Like, I'd already like signed to play like football, but I didn't know really what I was going to do with my degree. Like, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do next. And I just had this weird kind of like, it was one of those moments in your life where it's like, I almost felt like I audibly heard God. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I don't know. But I knew. But like, I just knew it's like, hey, Matt, like, stop running and pursue me, and like everything else will work itself out. And I was like, well, that sounds easier than I thought. And so one of those things that I remember listening out specifically was like, okay, I'm going to start, for lack of a better term, stop chasing tail, and I'm going to get really specific about who do I really want to be with for the rest of my life. What kind of person do I want in my life the rest of my life? Wow. And because I'd heard that in theory, people talk about that and teach through that. Like, what do I really want for someone the rest of my life? To date, but not only date, like, but date with intentionality, right? And so I listed those things out. That was in May, and I met Jesse in like maybe a couple weeks later.
Wow. No way.
And we spent like a whole summer. So I was really good friends with her. I was interning at a church once I like had this just reckoning with God, and like, he just breaks me. I was like, okay, before I go to this, like the football stuff, I'm gonna start interning at this church and just helping out. And that student pastor poured into me, and he was pouring into another guy. That guy was Jesse's cousin, so me and him connect. And I spent like all summer at Jesse's grandmother's house, like every day, every afternoon. After the interning stuff, the church was like literally across the street from her grandmother's house, still is. And that church ended up being the church that Jesse grew up in. Her parents served in, like, had served well. And I remember specifically, like, I'd prayed for someone who had gone through church hurt, like I had gone through. And Jesse's family had gone through church hurt. And so I remember the conversation where she and I were talking, and I told her that, and she told me the stuff that her family had gone through, and I was like, well, I'll be like, like, what if this is her? And then 6 years later, I asked her to marry me, and mainly because not because I didn't love her to death.
He said, "What if this is her? I better be sure." 6 years later,
it had nothing to do with that. Paul says love conquers all things, but I cannot pay the mortgage in love. And so, like, I was trying to finish school, she was trying to finish school, and so we waited till both of us had graduated and figured out before we got married. That was really difficult, but I was really proud of her. Like, we both finished school before that, and so it was a process and a journey. But I knew, and it was a really, really good thing. I did break up with her after a year, though, for like 3 days.
What?
Yeah, I did.
I don't know this story.
I was wrong. It was the worst 36 hours of my life. I was a really crappy person. Yeah. I was still dealing with a lot of fallout of my parents and family stuff, and I just couldn't handle my emotions, and I just got to a point where I just had this breakdown. I'm like, I'm going to screw everything up anyways, so I'm just going to end it. Like, I can't do this.
The old preemptive failure.
So I was like, I'm just going to screw it up, so might as well just do it now. And then 36 hours, I was like, crazy thought. I'm worse off than I thought I would be.
Wait, that was worse.
I literally go back to her house at 2 a.m. and I'm like, I am so sorry. I messed it up. And literally from there,
she said, "Who is this?"
Yeah.
From there, I went to therapy and I had conversations. I start undigging all this emotional stuff in my trash can, and it made me a better person. And genuinely, she's been with me every step of the way and through worse things that have happened since then. So I don't know if she listens to this or not, but whether she does or doesn't, she literally is I would be completely lost and miserable without her. So that was almost a decade ago.
Wow.
And it's a really cool thing. Really cool thing. But me on a drug deal is pretty cool too. I'm not gonna lie.
No therapy involved.
Yeah, pretty cool.
So Christy and I met through church. So she, her family came and visited here. I was 19.
This church?
This church. Oh. Yep. I was 19. I was the associate student intern. I was
not the main intern, but the second intern.
That's right. Yeah.
Assistant to the
regional intern. That's exactly right. And so her family came and visited. Now I was 19 and she was 26. And so that's what I'm talking about. So anyway, so her family visited here, and so in doing some follow up, I got assigned Christy to do follow up, and so
God earlier.
Right. Well, this is back in the days when if you visited here, you might get a knock on your door in the afternoon, and so she was there, and so we kind of talked, and I remember leaving the house going man, that's the kind of girl I want to marry, and but she's too old. She's 7 years older. She would never be interested, in a guy like me. And so it was kind of crazy. We were both got involved in the worship ministry. I played drums and she sang in the choir. Again, at this time, we had a choir. Mm-hmm. And I knew that she was a labor and delivery nurse and she worked the night shift. And so we were talking one time and I said, hey, I work with students. There's all kinds of times students are calling me late at night with problems that I have to kind of help counsel them through. Total lie, by the way. And I said, so, if you're not, if I'm ever up, maybe I'll give you a call. And she was like, yeah, here's my number. Give me a call. And so I would make myself stay up till 1 o'clock in the morning because she was always it's always busy the first few hours. And so I remember staying up, making myself stay awake, and I would call her. I was like, hey, what you doing? She's like, hey, we're really busy. Can you call back in an hour? And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, absolutely.
So I called back.
Pills.
Yeah. So called back at 2 a.m. Anyway, so one thing led to another, and we started dating, and the rest is history. So yeah.
Wow.
So,
6 years older?
She's 6.5, 7 years older than I am.
7 years. So that's great on the retirement side.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I was still in school, and I remember talking to my parents, what are you going to do for money? Because I said, I think I want to marry this girl, and I was like, she's a nurse. She'll be the sugar mama. I don't care.
Exactly.
I'm fine. What does it matter? But it's so funny. My mom, I'll embarrass her. She denies this to this day. My mom is very prim, very proper, Southern nobility kind of vibes. Imagine that. And when I first told her, about Christy, I said, yeah, she's 7 years older. And my mom goes, Chad, that's too old. That's too old. And now she loves Christy more than me, which is, I get it. And
fair.
she will just lie and refuse to admit she ever said that.
Never said it. Yep.
It never happened because she does not ever want to offend Christy, which I get. So
wow.
But yeah, that's how it kind of worked out.
You learn so much about one another.
That's right. So anyway, that's and she obviously our wives realized we were Mr. Right.
Yeah.
And
certainly right now.
Or right now, that's right. Or made poor decisions, and here we are. But anyway,
I was about to say that one's me.
Grace of God takes over. And,
Come on.
Oh man. But yeah, so that's what we did. We talked about Mr. Right this weekend.
We did.
So yeah,
God's plan for the man.
I have when you said talk about Mr. Right, very quickly I was like, I don't know if I've ever been Mr. Right, but man, I can tell you when I have been Mr. Wrong. Let me just tell you.
Right.
So in talking about talking about Mr. Right, we talked about how what they do is Mr. Right per se, the perfect example.
Yep.
It stays engaged with the wife long after the wedding, which is you on paper you're yeah, of course they do. Right. Of course they do. But then even in my own life, even when I've looked back after our first year or even after 2 years, now we're approaching 3 and 4 years. It's well, have I really? So I guess the question is, so why do we think we, whether it be knowingly or even subconsciously, almost disengage with our marriages even after we get married? Because you're there's all this buildup, all these things happen, and it's all right, now we coast. So why is that? Like, I don't know if it's the psychology behind it with guys. I don't know if it's a spiritual aspect. Well, let's dive into that. Why do we so quickly fall into like, hey, we kind of disengage?
There's almost a gravitational pull toward your life, your hobbies, your stuff, your thing. And I mean, you just got married, so you don't know what it's like to be in a relationship with a person that now two have become one. I mean, you've never lived like that before. Now that's the nature of the game. So I just think we revert to what we've always known, and that is, I've got my thing, you got your thing. We overlap, and that's really great. I love when we overlap. But then
I was waiting for how long we were going to get in before we made jokes like that.
There it goes.
That was much tamer than I thought the first one was going to be.
Yeah, that's true.
I just think there's a gravitational pull to our own things. There's a healthy sense of like, hey, you golf and I do, crafting or whatever. That's one thing. But what happens is, I think it's like, we're committed now. We're in a covenant relationship. He kind of hangs up his jersey, retires his jersey. I got the girl now. And so we don't necessarily date our spouse like we did, or we date them infrequently. And it's just, I just think it turns into everyday life. And everyday life just sort of beats some of the romance out of it. And, we've had seasons where we had date night for a long time. We've had seasons where we haven't, and back and forth. And it's just one of those things, the gravitational pull of everyday life. I think it just pulls us into our own separate worlds.
Yeah, and different seasons cause different things. Like, again, maybe you're in a season where you have a little bit more free time. Yeah. You can do the date night kind of things. Yep. Maybe you're in a season where you have children.
Kids.
Work is busy. And, like, I don't think those things are bad, but I think you really made a great point in the sermon yesterday. This idea of, like, the garden, like, how, what do you do to have your garden go poorly? Just do nothing, right? Yep. That you have to actively be working. And I think for our marriages, if we're not being proactive, we go down that slippery slope of not being engaged anymore with the marriage. It can be so easy to do.
And that was the point, right? We were in Ephesians 5, and the whole example of Jesus' relationship with his bride, the church, is the model, because it's a marriage passage, on the husband's relationship with his wife. And he waters her, he cultivates her, he's a grow her, as we were saying. Grow her, and the reality is, your wife is your lawn, and if you intentionally cultivate, good things can grow. But if you do nothing, that's where neglect becomes the worst thing. And the thing about neglect is nobody chooses to. You don't wake up and I'm going to neglect my spouse today. You just do other things. You just don't pay attention to them. And that's where I think it's really important in a marriage. And we'll talk a little bit about communication later. But it's important to say, hey, what are we doing here? Like, hey, there's distance. Distance is the enemy. Intimacy is the goal, the oneness thing. So when you start to feel distance, and I'll tell you, you've done this. We're pastors. We've done counseling with couples. We've all seen the couples sitting 2 inches from one another, but they are worlds apart.
That's exactly
that didn't happen in a minute. It's just the drift. So there's always going to be the drift. So we always have to fight against that to work to close the distance by and a husband's role is to be an initiator, to cultivate that, to lean into her.
And that's what's always so amazing to me. You talk about that distance. I always like to picture it's like ice. You've got this ice between the two. If the husband, or really either, but especially the husband, will make that first step to chip away at that ice, it is amazing how fast it can actually come down. And you can see, now again, I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying that it's just going to be automatic, but that restoration process can begin. It's always amazing.
So I heard a thing, someone was telling me, one of the people in our church came up to me after church, I don't know if it was this week or last week. My memory's horrible. Came up to me and said, hey, we were talking about stats and, marriage researchers. He goes, we were in counseling one time. Here's what the researcher told us, or the marriage counselor told us from marriage research, that if the spouses every day have like this time where they look each other in the eye, and it's something like a 20-second look.
That's creepy.
Oh, horrible. It's horrible. 20 seconds.
I'm looking this way now.
Look away. Like a 20-second eye contact thing without anything else, that there's some sort of it's like a healing to the negative vibes.
Well, you're supposed to bring oneness. Like,
that's crazy.
There's so many innuendos and things that you can plug in there, but like the whole thing of just stopping there, slowing down, and eliminating everything else, all of the noise, all of the craziness, all the distractions, and intimacy in just closeness, not intimacy in other contexts, but just the fact of like just slowing down and saying, "Hey, like I see you," and you start to see features that your wife that like, "Hey, I remember like at 19 years old, I remember how much I loved your eyes. I remember how much I loved your smile." Because what happens is some of it probably is ill will and ignorance by the guys, but like I think it's just like naturally talk about the psychology of it. We compartmentalize everything. There's my work jersey. There's my family thing. So now I'm dad. Now I'm work. Now I'm friend. now I'm husband, and so it's like the husband thing's taken care of. Hey, well, she's not
exactly.
She's not currently mad at me right now.
Yep. So we're good.
Where's the fire? It's not with her.
Yeah, so
I'm
fine.
Right.
I'm cool.
Yep.
And that's where like the psychology kind of stuff. And it's like it's not. So you kind of have to have the awareness of, hey, just because nothing alarming is happening right now doesn't mean that you're not one decision or one dirty sock left on the floor from the dams opening up.
Right.
Well, and there's also prioritizing that's lost in the scenario you just described. Your wife is your number one human priority, period. It's not your kids.
Yeah.
It's not your boss. It's not your job. It's not.
Right.
It's your wife. So if it's the wife, then we have to prioritize reconnecting with her over these other things.
Yeah.
And I mean, when's the last time someone told you that? I mean, we don't really
Right.
think that way, but when we open the scriptures and look at Jesus' example, it's like, no, the bride wasn't one of a bunch of things and he managed to do it okay. It was like, no,
Right.
priority bride, everything else takes its place after that. And that's our number one human relationship. That's the whole marriage text from Genesis 2:24, that the man leaves his father and his mother, is united to his wife. That's your primary relationship now in this life.
Right.
Is your spouse, not your parents and not your children.
That's exactly right. So you used the S word yesterday in the message.
I did. Did they bleep it or did it get through?
No. We left it out there. And the S word, of course, being submit. Submit is the S word. And there's I tell you what, some of the most misunderstood scripture I think that exists centers around this idea of submission at times, especially our verse. So I want to read it. Ephesians 5:22 says, "Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior." So wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. So can we unpack a little bit more here, this idea of submission? What does that look like in our marriages? What does that not look like in our marriages? What's Paul kind of talking about?
All
here?
I heard was, I'm the husband, you're the wife, go make me a sandwich. That's what I heard there. No, sadly,
I can't take you guys anywhere.
That's
you know
a clip
that?
we're going to pull later and post on socials. Just
right.
that one.
Sound guy Jonathan, let's clip that one if we could, buddy.
you will never successfully run for office in your life.
That's right.
We've got you on tape. So the reality is, so we're in Ephesians 5:22. It says, "Wives, submit to your own husbands." The interesting thing is, the word "submit's" not in that verse.
Really?
It does not exist. In the Greek, it says, "Wives, to your husbands." So where do we get the idea of submit? It's the verse before.
Okay.
So Ephesians 5:22, "Be subject to one another," to submit to one another in the fear of Christ. Verse 22, "Wives, to your own husbands." So the verse, "Wives, submit to your husband," the word "submit" is not even in that text in the Greek. It's not there. It's pulling from the verse before about how Christ followers should submit to one another. And from 5:18, which is just before that, about this is be filled with the Spirit, and here's what it looks like. And it looks like Christ followers submitting to one another, which means to be supportive and sort of deferential to one another.
Sure.
That's what we should do. And then it turns to the marriage relationship and starts with the wife. Now, wives, to the husband. So it's like, wow, the word's not even there. So we're going to dig into this more next week when we look at the wife's role in particular in 1 Peter 3. We'll dig into it. But the word that is there in verse 21, not the wife verse, but the one right in front of it, is the word hupotasso. And hupotasso, like, it literally means to support, basically. So, for example, when Jesus was when Mary and Joseph took Jesus to the temple when he was 12. Remember, they lost him along the way, right? And then they go and then find him. And like, there, we found him. And he's like, hey. And then at the end of the passage, it says, and he went with them and he submitted himself to them. What Jesus did to his parents is what we should be doing for one another, to be subject to them, to put ourselves not just under their authority, but to be in relational arrangement that says, you're the parent, I'm the child, I get how this works, So when you look at the different usages of the word submit, you don't get what Ephesians 5:22 has been used to do. Husband being an authoritarian over the wife or being dominant over the wife. You don't get dominant.
Right.
You get a care. You get nurture. You're the parent. You nurture the child. Parents don't dominate your child. That's not how you parent. Try that. See what happens.
Yeah,
When the kid gets old enough, they're gone, and you're never going to be a memory.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So dominance is not the motif.
Right.
Challenges often, way too often. We talked about this in the weekend. The husbands and Christians and churches have allowed the idea to be the husband's the head, and so the wife should submit. Therefore, he should be dominant and she should be subservient. And that's just not how the word works. It literally means to be supportive.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the S word in a nutshell. Is that they each have a role. Remember in Genesis 2, we saw that God created the spouse to be the helper.
Right.
That's what it looks like for the wife to be the helper. Is she supports. He provides some leadership, and it doesn't mean she can't lead and he doesn't support. There's more mutuality than we think.
Yeah.
The problem is we make these roles into rules. And once they become rules, you can't cross the line to my side. I'm doing my side, you do your. It's like, it really doesn't work that way. There's a lot more shared space on these roles than we think.
Yeah, and we've talked about this quite a bit on the podcast, the importance of the overall narrative of Scripture, because, oftentimes people grab one or two of these verses, they take them out of context, and they try to use those in an effort to, like you said, dominate somebody else. When you look at the entirety of Scripture, it always cracks me up when people accuse the Bible of being misogynistic, because I'm going, when you understand the culture that these words are being written in, the number of times that women are talked about, that women are honored.
That's right.
Again, we use the story oftentimes of at the resurrection, how the women were there first. Well, if you were trying to build a credible narrative of a lie, you would not start out by saying that the women had been there first.
They have no legal standing.
That's exactly right.
So why would they be your legal witness?
And so for Paul and for these other writers to be writing these things saying, hey, you don't dominate them. Like you help one another. You love one another.
That's right.
It is the least misogynistic thing on the face of the planet, and it shows you God's heart for mankind, male and female.
So if you continue with the word submit or its variants like be subject to, it looks like Philippians 2, where Jesus submitted himself to the will of the Father and for our redemption. When you submit, you are making a choice to say, I want to get under God's arrangement so that God's blessing can flow. That's all it is. It's not a dominance thing. The problem is our inner hardcore self-centered, nature wants to turn it into dominance.
Right.
I'm the husband, you're the wife. You submit to me, make me sandwich. It's like that's not the goal. So.
No, that's right.
So kind of continue on the theme of some of the psychology behind, because I think there's just obviously God has wired men to be who they are, made in the image of God. There are certain aspects that are pretty stereotypically true. One of those things is, so when we had this idea of, we talked about being a lover or a provider, and when we kind of created to where that doesn't have to be an or in the middle.
Yes,
yet guys naturally tend towards putting that or in the middle. It's well, if I love her, I'm not really a man, or I don't want to be too emotional, I don't want to be too feely. But if I provide for her, I'm checking all these boxes, and it really feels culturally driven. The question is this: how do we reckon, hey, this is how I'm providing? Because for a lot of guys, it's where we find worth. It's where we find value.
It feeds our ego, right?
I want to know that I did a good job. I want to know. I don't need picking apart what I just want to be told that I did a really good job and that you saw that. That's what guys want to hear. You want respect, and girls and ladies want love and affection and those things. So when we're dealing with these two sides of the magnetic spectrum, and we know that at some point we've got to more, as the husbands, take that step to move towards where our wife is at, and lovingly she'll do the exact same thing.
That's right.
How do we reckon that? How do we start that process? What is that supposed to look like? How am I supposed to take steps to say, hey, I know that I'm finding my worth in my providing, but how can I find worth in my wife by how I love her and because I love her?
So I would say it this way. So we default to provide her mode in the areas that we feel very competent to provide for her, in material, roof over your head, food on the table.
Yeah, it's tangible,
So
right?
what I would say is, there's nothing wrong with being to provide her, but you need another box under that too. How about not just provide for her physical needs? How about for her relational needs? Who else is supposed to do that? You want some other guy to do that? Or would you be interested in doing that? Would you going to do it, or somebody else? So obviously it's your role to provide for her relational needs. Now that's where guys are like, well, I'm really competent on the go hunt an animal, bring home meat side. I'm not really competent on touchy-feely, emotional, I don't even
know what a feelings wheel is. I have no idea.
It's not only am I not good at that, I just want to run from that. That's not something I'm comfortable with.
Yeah.
The reality is, well, that's the area to grow in. In the same, you think it's comfortable for a woman to submit to a guy that she's, sees his flaws? It's hard to be submissive and supportive of a person's leadership when sometimes you go, bonehead doesn't always make good decisions. How do I get behind and get under some dumb decisions? Well, that's the grace side of the two imperfect people who come together. So the reality is, you should provide for her, of course, but provide on the relational side too. Provide on the emotional side too. Just learn to do that stuff, because honestly, that's where you need to grow. That's where I need to grow. And I feel very uncomfortable and incompetent in those things, but I can learn to grow in them. And the reality is, and I'll tell you what, 23 years of pretty much full-time marriage counseling, if you don't do that, someone else will. And if you don't do that, that doesn't mean that goes away for her.
Right.
Those needs exist. And if you ignore them like they don't exist, or you just don't ever pay attention that they're there, you are setting into motion something that can go horribly wrong. And I could tell story after story of no one set out to be where they are, but he backed away, and she didn't know what to do, and time over time, the next thing you know, I found a way to meet a need, and I don't even know how this happened. And it happens too much.
So let me ask you this. So obviously, as dudes, we're talking about this provide her, kind of thing. Yeah. Like for me as a guy, like I like a checklist, right? Yeah. I go, I've done my job. Here it is, check. Done. and to know that I'm able to provide for my wife and my children, that feeds my ego. And I don't think it's bad to be proud of that. God's blessed and given, abilities and all that kind of stuff. So that's a good thing. But so say there's a guy who's probably listening to this podcast right now that's like, okay, I've got the provider thing down, but how do I do a better job at loving her and meeting those needs, those emotional needs? Because providing, like you said, for those, what's a good first step for that person to kind of take to do that?
Yeah. So for me, just tell you where I've struggled with that is your view of love and your view of what she needs and her view of what she needs are going to be different.
Sure.
So you're going to need to find out, what does it mean for her to feel loved?
Different is a very nice way of saying completely off.
Yeah,
like different is a very gracious way of saying, hey, dude, you're not even in the same ballpark.
We're not speaking the same language.
Not at all.
Right. Yeah. So 1 Peter 3:7 says, husbands, in the same way, and then that's the passage that comes before. We're going to be on that next week for women right here, wives in 1 Peter 3. Husbands, in the same way, dwell with your wives in an understanding way as the weaker vessel, meaning she can't bench press like you can. She's a woman, and show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered. So we have to dwell with the wife, the text says, in an understanding way. It literally means according to her.
Right.
So you work with the wood, you work with the grain. Right. You ever work against the grain? It's like, hard, that's stupid.
Well, that's where the problem can come in when we are placing value. Right. Like, I want her to see and be so proud of all the things that I am doing, because that makes me feel loved. The whole process of that is like, that's great. And like, when your wife's loving you well, she'll see those things. Yep. But if you're trying to pursue her, it's like, I want you to love me the way I want to be loved. So I'm going to love you the way that I want to be loved. And that does not, it just bumps against each other.
Yeah, and the hard thing is trying to figure out, well, then what is the way that she ought to be loved or would recognize as love? That's like nailing Jell-O to a wall. That is really hard to find out. So you got two options. Man. One, you could do something, well, the two options that come to my mind, you could do something like, love languages, where you take the test, it's really simply go online.
Words, gifts.
Right, but once you get a clue of what hers could be, start to operate with that. That's one.
Yeah.
I found that there's an easier way. You just ask, hey, what would it be? What does feeling loved, what would that be like for you? What can I do to help you feel more loved? That is such a dangerous question, because what you're going to hear back is something you're probably not, you're not aware of it really. Right. You're going to be like, whoa. And here's what makes it really difficult. If you ask that next week, and then a month after that, you're probably going to get different answers along the way. Yeah. But just getting used to saying, hey, how can I help you feel more loved?
If you want to melt that ice you're talking about, like I can imagine if someone's marriage is out there and kind of on a downward spiral, that if the husband stopped and asked that question, that spiral would come to a halting stop. For even just a second. I'm not saying it's still not going to go bad. I'm still saying there's not a lot to figure out. A lot of
work to do.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I'm saying just for a moment, a halting stop would happen, because it's like all of a sudden, he cares. Like he hears me.
And one of the things I've done in marriage counseling is when we get to that moment, like, okay, we're there, I'll literally be like, hey, dude, ask her. Now listen to this. Because they haven't, and they probably on their own may not get there until some other day, if ever. So facilitating that's magic. So I've literally sat there and watched him be like, hey, I don't really know. And he just says it, and she's like, well, I don't know. And then here comes, and all of a sudden it's like you just see the distance closing. It's a wonderful thing.
That is good. But I think that's 100% right. At a minimum, know your spouse's love language.
That's
though,
right.
because
That's right.
you know
It is helpful.
Yeah, it is because
My wife, she's rare. She has all 5.
really.
Yeah. So
Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
I need a lot of time with words
Awesome.
that have gifts attached to it with service, and I'm just like,
While you hold my hand, while
she has 3 of those 5 are just raging. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it is interesting because, again, you typically try to love in the way that you receive love.
Exactly.
But you have to be a student, like you were talking about here, knowing your spouse in order to be able to give them the love in the way they receive it. But I love what you said there. Ask them. Talk to them.
Crazy thought.
Have that
It's like do
conversation.
the thing that you need to be doing.
Right.
Talking.
Yeah, in that nuts.
That's hard. It's hard for the guys though because it's not the most comfortable place to be.
It can be. So I love the quote that you use, and I want to read this. It's from Dave Muir. Am I
Dave
saying
Muir.
that?
He's a
Muir.
good buddy, yeah.
Muir. He says, "A great marriage is not when the perfect couple comes together. It is when an imperfect couple learns to enjoy their differences." That's a great quote.
Yep.
All right, but for real though. How can we learn to enjoy our differences? Because it seems like there are some differences in marriage that are pretty fundamental or can be incredibly frustrating. So how do we do it? And what does Scripture have to say about that? How do we learn to enjoy our differences?
I will say this is where Rose and I, so then again, we've been together 38 years nonstop, married 34. We are profoundly different people. We think very, very differently, like almost close to incompatibly different on a lot of fronts, literally. So on any issue, you name it, her approach and my approach are
just different.
They are.
Yeah.
And so learning how to build a little bit of a pause in your reactions to how different things are, instead of like, wow, this is the dumbest thing I ever heard. I found out you shouldn't say that. What you should really say
Marriage
is,
tips from Jim Boss.
what you should really say is, hey, so what do you mean by that? How would that look? And by the preponderance of questions, she starts to pick up, you're not on board, are you? I'm like, not at all. So it really, so again, I've been helped by the movie Rocky. It helped me a lot. Remember Rocky, right?
I would not consider Rocky a marriage movie, but here we are.
Well, there's the moment.
I like
so
it.
remember he's talking about Adrian. He's telling Paulie that he wants to marry her. And Paulie's like, she's stupid. Why would you want to marry her? So that kind of, it's a weird conversation.
Coming from Paulie is an interesting statement.
Yeah,
Rocky.
interesting. Yeah, so Rocky's like, and you probably remember the scene, but he goes, she got gaps, I got gaps. Together, we ain't got no gaps. That's what he said. So I have come to learn that Rose does think very differently from me. But that difference covers my blind spot in a lot of ways because she will actually think in a way that I don't, and I miss stuff that way. So when I don't stop and recognize there's tremendous value in the difference, then I devalue it. My instinct is to devalue it and think that's stupid. And that hurts the relationship. And it can't be a thought that I give root in my head. I have to be like, no, it's different for a reason. It's not right. It's not wrong. It's just super different. Learning how to appreciate that and then actually draw from it. There are certain things that if I'm going to go about doing something, her way is a better way because her way will typically be more relational. Mine will be more rational.
Interesting.
Mine will be probably the smartest way to do it. Hers is probably the better way to do it because humans are involved. Right.
She got gaps, I got gaps. Together we got no gaps. So between that and Rocky,
I kind of want you to say it in a Rocky accent. That's kind of what I was ready for.
Between that and him defeating communism in Rocky IV with his fist, I think Rocky's.
Speaking of, do you watch the football games the other day? You see the beer commercial in between where the Russian guy, I forget his name.
Oh, Dolph Lundgren.
Did you see him lately?
Yeah.
Did you ask? Is he okay?
I just assumed it was
comes in
all
with
like
the cooler and he's holding
AI,
the beer cooler.
CGI, something.
Did you see his arms are like little twigs? I'm like, what happened there? So I looked up. Is he okay? It's like, he's been battling cancer for a long time.
Okay.
And I'm
that
like,
took a turn.
So I was just like, poor whatever his name was.
Dolph Lundgren, yeah.
I mean, in the Rocky stuff.
Shout out to Dolph.
I'm like, all this working out's going to turn into like, we're all going to be bony people someday.
But don't you remember that? I mean, it was Rocky IV. He beat communism with his fist.
He sure did.
He
did. So we've kind of danced around the theme of communication all through the podcast and even through that. And we kind of talked about it, each kind of question where it's, hey, so how do we reckon, how do I provide with how I love? And you start through, you just ask. So let's say we ask, how do we continue down that road? Because like obviously one of the important things or one of the most, I would say easiest way that you're going to screw this whole thing up is just lack of communication or communicating in a way that's
it's
like
the
we said,
genesis of like all of my problems.
I'm talking to you the way that I want to be talked to, so I don't know how that doesn't make sense. But it's like, well, there's another person involved. That's why it doesn't make sense. So I guess the question is, as we're trying to be a grower of our spouse, What are some practical ways that husbands can continue to open up, to be vulnerable, to say, hey, I want to love her, I want to grow her, I want to stay engaged with her? Because at the heart of that, a lot of it comes down to, I don't really know how to communicate well. I don't know how to do this.
Apart from grunts and farts. Yeah.
So what are outside of, okay, just ask the question. Okay, we've asked. What do we do then?
So I was thinking about this earlier, and this is where anatomically guys are very different from women. And that's
going to be a screen grab later, and I'm going to feel like on the background of my phone. Like I'm telling
Sound guy Jonathan, can we clip that, please?
Anatomically, women have one mouth and two ears. Men typically have one ear and two mouths. We don't listen. So if we're going to ask the question, then we have to be a listener.
I see what you did there.
So
I like it.
So I condemn myself in making this statement because I have two mouths and one ear when it comes to my wife. It's not that I don't want to listen. I just somehow don't listen. So asking the question, whatever you're talking about, you have to learn to listen, and it's incredibly hard to do.
It's no fun.
It's really hard. It's like
no fun.
2 seconds into the answer, I'm evaluating the answer's trajectory, and I'm already thinking about 7 other things that have nothing to do with it.
You said rational, and I was like, that's exactly what my brain was. Like the response, and I'm like, well, we should do that differently, or how if we do this, or actually, I've got a better way to do that, really.
I cannot tell you
3 better ways.
how many times, Christy, and I don't mean to do it, I cut her off because I already know where I think she's going with the sentence. And I go, okay, well, this is what we're going to do, and I'll go, blah, 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 blah. She goes, well, can I finish saying what I was going to say? And I'm like,
man.
I'm so sorry.
Talk?
Yeah,
sorry.
No, I can talk for both of us. Remember, I have 2 mouths now.
So that's what I resonate with what you're saying. So that is me. I've seen the evil one.
All
it is
of
me.
it. And let me just say this, though. That's funny, and it's real, and we can laugh. But if I were the devil, no comments, please. If I were the devil, I would use that.
Yeah.
That would be, remember in Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis is talking about praying for other people, and he's like, you should pray for other people. No, it's in Screwtape.
Yeah.
So praise for other people, and he's telling let the Christian pray for their mother-in-law or whatever, but let him only pray about their faults, because then you rub the blister more and more and more by praying only for their faults, right? So the reality is, I think when we're getting into trying to listen, trying to communicate, trying to talk, if we are not listening, we can find ourselves in a place where it's just all faults based. It's like evaluative. It's all like, man, I don't agree with what you're saying. I know where you're going, and I'm not going. It's next thing you know, we give the devil something that he can rub. There's a real sore there that can become something more. And somebody once said years ago, in fact, I did a series on it, not because our church needed it, because I needed to spend time on it, and I spend more time writing series and delivering them than doing anything. So I need this. And the thing that somebody once said is, to listen is to love. And I was like, that's pretty right on. So I did a series called Learning to Listen, because I needed to learn to listen. I needed to spend time on it. So I spent a whole month working on this. And it was for me. I was just sharing with the church stuff that I was trying to learn for myself, because I recognize I have a very active mind, and listening is not part of that.
Right.
And it needs to be part of it. And when I don't listen, Rose just simply doesn't feel loved. Now that she's heard this, she's going to be like, yeah, what about that? And I'm going to be like, what? I didn't hear what you said.
That was not me. It was a different
You see what I'm
guy.
saying? It's such a challenge. Yeah. And I think our spiritual enemy uses the listening to create slivers in our relationship, in our hearts, that just sit there and get worse over time. So,
well, I found it funny with students was not necessarily in like in a relational standpoint, but it's like, and I think we've all seen this in different parts of ministry. Anytime that there's a moment where things are going to get serious, guess what? Every one of my students has to do. They've all got to go to the bathroom. They've all got to go to the bathroom. They've all got to get up, and I've got to go do this, and I forgot about this, and whatever. And on that same principle, I think what very clearly happens is, I think our enemy is smart, like incredibly smart, and cunning, and knows that if there's a serious need or void or hole in our life, he wants no part of that to be filled.
Yeah.
And same thing in your relationship. Yep. If there's a serious hole or void in your life with your spouse, there is no part of him that wants that to be filled or addressed or fixed. Yeah. Because that blister, like, keep that blister open. Because it's just going to get worse. And it's just at some point you're going to say, I'm done with this.
That's right.
I'm not doing this anymore.
That's right.
I'm not going to go through this hurt. I'm not going to feel this anyway. I am tired of this. And it's not, very rarely is that a one-time action that brings you to that point.
That's
and
exactly
if we continue to not, let me rephrase. If if I continue to not communicate and I continue to not be to pursue as a grower and a lover and all of those things, you'll find yourself in that position where that blister is not worth dealing with anymore.
Yeah.
Yep.
And this idea of communication, I do think it's so important, especially when it comes to listening, because I mean, the thing that I can do, there's so much going on, right? Like we've all got, especially as pastors, I mean, but anybody that's just alive in this world, your phone's constantly blowing up. There's distractions everywhere.
Kids got practice in the game, and we forgot a kid, and like all of this.
Exactly. So like if Christy and I go out on a date, the most special thing that I can do is I can take my phone and I can put it in my pocket and I can turn it off and we can look and we can talk.
That's right on.
I think also about, especially, we're not talking necessarily about parenting during the series, but think about the importance, at the dinner table. Instead of having the TV on or something else distracting you, whatever else it is, turn all that off, look at your kids, have a conversation.
Exactly right.
But that listening, man, how in today's world when there's so much vying for our attention, one of the best gifts that we can give is our focus on someone that we love.
It's crazy. The more that I lock into do that, it's like the more unnatural that feels. Yeah. And I think there's that shows the deterioration of parts of culture, but also the enemy. Like, hey, don't slow down, keep going. You can't.
I stop at a stoplight and I pull out my phone to keep my, because I'm bored.
Well,
you know what I'm saying?
You looked lovingly into Chad's eyes for 10 seconds, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like I'm gonna tell Jonathan to cut. I can't watch this.
It's interesting you say it. So Sherry Turkle, I do believe is her last name. She's a sociologist at MIT. She wrote a book called I'll get to that in a minute. I don't know. Anyway, so you can look her up. Sherry Turkle, MIT. So they did a huge project looking at the effect of the effect of screens, engaging in a buffered reality, the effects of screens on people. And they started tracking kids who are natives now to this world. And the one capacity that they do not develop by being engaged with screens from a young age, it's not detectable. So as they start trying to detect certain capacities, not detectable. Empathy.
Oof.
Really?
Empathy. You know why? Everything's buffered. I don't have to look you in the eye. I don't look anyone in the eye.
Wow.
I look at what I want to look at, and I don't look at what I don't want to. If I have a difficult thing, I text it to you. I'm not going to look at you, hey, we're breaking up. It's like, hey, I can't do. So it's because it's buffered.
That's right.
And so when you only know buffered, you cannot.
It's not a person; it's a screen.
But you literally you have no capacity to have empathy, to look at another person,
That's
feel what they're
scary.
Yeah, I forget the name of the book. It's Sherry Turkle, conversation.
Stuff I've seen in student ministry, whatever. Because it's not even. It's got to the point where it's like, hey, I don't even have to really tell them anything.
Yeah.
I can just stop and delete everything, and it's over with. Yeah. It's really just that simple.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's fast forward about 10 years. Try that in life and tell me how that goes. But you're not going to be able to reckon with that. Ask a student to. This is not every student. Some of our students that we have are killing it. But some of our students who are especially like middle school or things like that, if I ask them to have that conversation or have a tough conversation with someone real,
can't do it.
They will actually it will trigger them. It will induce panic. Why? Because it's such a foreign idea. It's such a strange thing.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So to kind of sum up our conversation again, talking about Mr. Right, and one of the things is that we are, as husbands, we are to love our brides as Christ loves the church.
He's our example.
Yeah. Well, that seems a little overwhelming to love a bride.
Huh?
Yeah,
the highest calling.
Yeah, and it can be a little bit, maybe even confusing at times. So my question as we kind of wrap up our conversation today is what does that look like in real terms? That we are supposed to love our brides as Christ loves the church. How do we do that, and how can couples support one another? In doing that in our marriages.
Well, I would say, first of all, you have to frame loving your wife like Jesus loves his bride, the church. You have to frame it correctly, because if you don't, you're giving the devil a mighty big club to beat you and your family with.
Well, for sure.
So the wrong club would be, or the way to think of it that is a club to beat you with, is all or nothing. I either do all this perfectly like Jesus, or I can't do any of it because I'm a failure.
Right.
That'd be the wrong way to look at it. This is an example to follow. Here's how to do it. If you were learning a skill and you're watching a YouTube video of that skill, you would repeat that to learn it.
Right.
So you're not a failure, you're a learner. So let's look at the example of Jesus as helping me be a learner of that, not a pass-fail, all or nothing thing. The devil really does a great job of all or nothing. Oh, you didn't read your Bible today? Quit reading it. Quit reading it. All or nothing. You skipped a day.
You didn't understand something. You can't. You don't understand any of it.
Gosh, that is such a good point. That is because you don't hear another language and immediately
I'm never
expect
gonna
to
get it. Never gonna get it.
And then or anything
crazy.
that you do. We're teaching my daughter how to drive right now.
Exactly right.
It's not like she makes one mistake and that's it. You never again.
That's right.
You get back in the saddle, right?
That's right. So Jesus gave me an example I can learn from.
That's
and
so
God's grace means gift. Grace means you're not going to be graded on your success or failure. You are a success. Granted, gifted,
Done.
attributed to you.
Yeah.
So look at it like baseball, sports. It helps us think. If you got into the batter's box knowing there are no strikes, balls, or fouls for you, just swing away, you'd swing away.
Yeah, I'm hitting tanks.
Right?
That's what
I'm
hitting tanks.
I'm home run practice, so all I'm doing.
Just BP.
Grace says there are no balls or strikes in this game. You just go swing away, Merrill. That's what you're doing.
That's right. I understood that reference.
There you go.
Signs.
Right?
Yep.
If you do, in the comment section, tell me you know what movie that is. Swing away, Merrill.
Yep.
Great movie, by the way. So anyway, but the basic idea is what Jesus provided for us is an example that we can learn from. It's a pattern to learn from, not all or nothing failure. So.
Right.
So it's a high calling.
Right.
It's really high calling. But when we get to the wives calling next week, we'll be like, wow, that's a high calling too. They're both high calling. We're image bearers.
Yeah.
Both. And so our
right.
callings are high.
And here's the great thing about trying and failing. You're trying.
Yeah,
and you're
exactly.
getting better every
And
single
you're becoming
time.
what you're
it's
trying.
like it's kind of the old school thing about valleys and peaks. Eventually, your valleys are higher than your previous peaks. Like
That's exactly
you'll get
right.
better with practice, and
Exactly.
so that's really an encouragement to me. Because again, love your bride as Christ loves the church. That is a big deal. Do anything like Jesus, but we keep trying and we keep trying to do better, and each time we gain a little ground.
Yeah, we started the message saying there's no such thing as a perfect marriage because
Right.
there's no such thing as a perfect spouse because there's no such thing as a perfect person. That's always going to be that way until Jesus comes back. So that's that. And since I can't be perfect, so why bother? Well,
Right.
because that's not the point. The point isn't be perfect. The point is grow into the role.
It's a really ignorant way of thinking, but yet it's where a lot of us
If
will
I'm
land.
the devil,
That's
I'm
crazy.
just, all I'm going to do is
that's right.
you did it again.
Crazy.
You blew it. Might as well quit.
Guess you're done.
You're
Yeah,
not
they're-
married because
right.
it's like, what? What's going on here?
No, that's so good.
It's the kid throwing their bat down and throwing it. It's like, I can't do any of this.
It's
I'm
like,
done. I'm
it's
done.
like-
Whatever. And like I've had myself throw that adult tantrum many a time.
And so have I. And I wish it was a long time ago.
So for all the dudes that are out there, we want you to know we're rooting
love
for you.
you.
We're rooting for you in your marriages.
Love you.
Keep at it. Keep swinging away.
Yeah, yeah.
You got this.
Can I offer a tool?
Yeah,
I want to offer a
please.
tool.
Yeah.
So for marriages, this is a tool that Rose and I are going through marriage counseling. We've done this many times, like for us, going through with a counselor. And the counselor offered a tool for us one time, and I was like, so we did it. I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I've always kept it in the back of my mind as a go-to tool.
Sure.
But anyway, it's called, you can look it up online. It's an app called Lasting. Go in your app store. Lasting. It's blue with a white heart in it, Lasting. It's the research from the Gottman Institute, which is the world's finest marriage research institute. And it puts together, it's really stunning. And I'll just say it this, it costs $85 a year to have it. Mm-hmm. It's the best $85 you'll ever spend.
Really?
All the areas we
Lasting.
talked about are in there. Sexual health, communication, finances, conflict, it's all in there. And when you load the app, it'll ask, what are your challenges? You just click the sets of challenges. It'll curate all of the modules after that according to where you are. You have your spouse download it, and it ties you together. So it'll say, communication module, you'll get a ping. Christy will get a ping. Do module number 1. And you're like, oh, for every one positive, for every one negative interaction that you have, it takes 5 positives to overcome that. It's like, wow. So you do your little part, she does hers, and it puts you together, and it walks you through.
Oh, wow.
If you do yours and she doesn't do hers, it'll ping you saying, we're still waiting for Christy over here. So it walks you through issues.
Wow.
It gives you research. It gives you activities to do. It's phenomenal.
That's great.
And the only reason we haven't used it because I've neglected to use it. So take my advice. I'm not using it. So anyway, lasting.
Yeah.
$85 a year is your
Yep.
subscription, and it's the best $85 you'll ever spend.
That's awesome.
And if you have one particular issue like communication or finances, something that you're like, that's a big one for us, just click on that one and then sync up with your spouse. And you just go through the modules, and you can go at your own pace, day to day to day. So really good tool.
So Lasting app, make sure you download that. So this Sunday we're going to be talking about the wife's role, the woman's role in the marriage, and I do want to settle a few fears. So next week on the podcast, it's not just going to be 3 dudes having a conversation. We're actually our elementary director, Lindsay Layton, is going to be here with us. Lindsay's been married for some time,
Looking forward to
so
it.
we're going to get the female perspective. She's going to come set us straight, which is
We
gonna be
should
great.
have just our wives do the whole
honestly,
thing next week.
absolutely.
Because I'm going into it going, well, I know what the text says, but
But I just want to make that's going to be a real special
It's gonna be
episode of the
awesome.
podcast. having Lindsay on here. And so, ladies, we have not forgotten about you, and next week's going to be just for you. And I think really enjoy that. And gentlemen, make sure you tune in as well so you can get a behind the scenes look at what's going on. So anyway, but yeah, we'll continue this Sunday, 9:30 and 11. Do also want to give a shout out to our marriage mentors that's coming up for folks who are interested in, like you said, I love how you say it on the weekends. Maybe your marriage has been through it and you have some wisdom and experience to offer other ones. We would like for you to talk to us about being a marriage mentor. We'll have a special time of training for that to equip you. And then, but maybe your marriage is going through it, or maybe not yet, but you know that you will, because every marriage will. And you're looking for a mentor relationship. No matter which side of that coin you're on, email us, marriage@vaughnforest.com. And we would love to get you connected to our marriage mentor ministry.
Perfect.
So, gentlemen, I think that is a good place to wrap it up today. So thank you guys for the conversation. On behalf of Jim Botts, Matt Aldridge, sound guy Jonathan, and myself, thank you for being here. We will catch you guys next time.